Okay guys, so as you can see, started to put some paint on it, started to detail it, put some shading and highlights on the different little bits and bats. Also, just want to show you this. Started to put the bay window on, and as you can see, started to carve the tile. See the tile top from green foam. That's easily done. I think I've covered that in another tutorial. But if you want me to redo it again, let me know in the comments and I can do that, no problem. So what I'm going to do, I've started to weather the panelling and the wood, etc. like that. So I'm going to show you how I've done that. And I'm going to show you on this. This is going to be a smaller Bree building using the same sort of basics that I've built this bigger building from. And the reason I'm going to show you, because it's a little bit different. I'm doing it with an airbrush. So if you've not got an airbrush, I recommend picking one up. You can get them really cheap on eBay. You don't have to get like a fancy mega expensive one. I started off with I think it was a £9 cheap as chips one from China. And just got used to using it. The reason that I did that was mainly because I used it for terrain. Now when you're using it for terrain, you don't need a detail brush, airbrush should I say, because you're working with bigger surfaces, so you can get one with a wider spray cone and get really good techniques with it. The blending's a lot easier, and just sort of weathering and feathering things in is really easy. So what I've done, I've just got this. I said it's going to be a different building. Ignore it at the minute because it isn't going to end up looking like this. But I've just stuck some of the Tudor cladding on the side. I'm going to show you how I paint the panelling. Now, as you can see on the Bree house, you've got large panels, you've got very small panels, and I'm going to show you basically on this sort of biggish, medium-sized panel how to airbrush it to get a good finish. We'll show you on that because it's a little bit bigger. So I'm going to use Iwata Neo on this one. These are, you could probably pick them up for, I don't know, £50 on eBay, which, you know, it's not a small amount of money, but in the scale of good brushes, it's a reasonable price for a very good brush. You can get ultra fine detailing with this, so I highly recommend it when you move on from your really cheap brush. I'm going to start. I've already put one layer on, burnt umber I'm using for layer wear, and what I just want to do is just want to get a nice even coat. So I just want a couple of drops like so, and I'm just going to get the air going by pressing the trigger. Yep, the generator is going to kick in a minute, so when that does I'll probably stop talking and fast forward it. And all I'm going to do is press the trigger down to get the airflow going, then you pull back on the trigger to add paint. Don't just always go full whack at it, sort of get used to using it, and you know, sort of splaying sprays in and using smaller amounts of air and smaller amounts of paint to, like I say, get yourself used to using the trigger. Once you get used to it, you can do a lot more stuff and it's a lot easier to do it. So I just want this to be a flat dark brown coat. As you can see, it's a bit blodgy, so I'm going to start spraying. The thing with an airbrush as well, always try to keep the airbrush moving, because if you stop, all you do is you're just building up colour in one spot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the camera, give that a couple of minutes to dry. Paint out of an airbrush does dry a lot quicker than painting it on, because it's a finer layer, so we'll come back in a second. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go in with 3 lighter shades of like a brown tan. We've got the nice base coat of the dark brown, and the way to try and get a good effect is, what we want to try and do, we're going to feather it, which is a lot easier with an airbrush, which is why I'm using an airbrush, as I've said before. We're going to try and leave the darker brown just in the very edges, and as you get to the centre of the panel, we're going to leave it lighter. So we'll start off, it's got the dark brown base. We're going to go, like I say, we've got 3 different colours. You can go any browns from here, so there's not much point me telling you what I'm using, because whatever tones you want, you'll go for that. You can do it in two colours. You don't have to use 3 like I am. I'm just using 3 because I like the finish. It's more gradual. You can do it in 2 if you want a quick job. Just start at obviously your next colour is going to be your darkest highlight, let's put it that way. So give it a shake up, couple of drops, and what we're going to do, I'll show you before we actually start getting into detailing. If I put my airbrush very close, like so, and get the paint to start to come out, still got some burnt umber on there so I can dry that off. So I hold my airbrush close. This is what I'll see, because paint comes out of an airbrush, I think I've explained this in another video, in a cone. So the closer your surface is to the tip of your airbrush, the smaller the cone of paint, the further away the cone gets bigger. So the closer you are, if you want to get like details, yeah, you can do that. Is that coming out on camera? Yeah. And then the further away, so just get here, and you see, it's like a bigger circle. Yeah. So you can use that to your advantage by depending where you want to go and how big you want the highlights to be. At this moment in time, I want to mainly fill most of this panel, barring, like I said, just the outside edges. So I'm going to come further away. The further away, the closer you are as well, you get a more stark contrast of the paint. The further away you are, it's a more gradual. But what you don't want to do is just start out here, yeah, and start spraying, because you could end up, it's quite hard to aim from far away, so you could end up hitting, you know, different parts of the model. So what I tend to do is get fairly close to where I know it's going to be roughly where I want it, start the air off, start the paint off, and then come back like so. Yeah, like I say, we're just filling it like that, and then I just want to fill in the edges, so I'll get a little bit closer, and we're just leaving the dark colour just around the edges. I'm going to get a nice flat colour in the centre, like so. Yeah, and just tidy it off a little bit. That coming out. And if you make a mistake with this, all you do is you put your burnt umber back in your airbrush and you just go over the areas where you've made a mistake, let it dry, and go again. So that's our medium colour. What I'm now going to do is I have a little gizmo here just off camera where I can spray excess paint into until it's all gone so far. So we're going to go a little bit lighter. We're going to drop a few drops of paint in, like so. We're going to start the air off. The good thing about starting your air off as well, any wet bits of paint as well, it dries it for you. Yeah. So we're going to start in the centre again, and we're just going to work our way out, same as we did before. You see how that's coming out? And then back to our little container. Get rid of the excess paint, and we're going to go to our lightest highlight. Literally 2 drops of paint, that's all I need in there for this, because it's just going to be in the centre. So I'll start my airflow off, dry off any excess paint. If it's a little bit wet, don't worry too much, because it helps with the blend, but you don't want it soaking wet. And all I'm going to do now is just fan that out, like so. And can you see that gradual colour? Can you see that? Is it coming out well on the camera? Yeah, and that's the basis. Just let me empty my brush. That's the basis for our panel. So I'm just going to go and clean my airbrush, and then I'll come back and show you the next stage in getting it to look weathered and starting to look a bit more realistic. Okay guys, so now on to the aging and weathering. What we're going to do is we're going to get some, this is, obviously it's an Agrax shade pot, but it's slightly watered down Agrax shade. it's not as harsh, because what you don't want to do here is whack a wash on, a shade on, and it to be too much, because you'll struggle then to get it back. So it's a little bit more watered down, and we're going to just put it on gradually and see how we go. So we're going to get it on, and what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and work out where dirt and grime would sit naturally. So obviously around the sitting on top of the timber beams, up and under the underside of the timber beams is definitely where, you know, you'd get a bit of that muck. So we're just gonna pop that over there so we don't have that age-old problem that people have with these pots of them tipping over. And we're just gonna start putting it in, and we're not gonna, what I'll do is I'll show you what not to do first. Don't go in, we've got a nice 90-degree angle there, don't start going in 90 degrees like that, yeah. Feather it in, because you'd get build up in the corner. It wouldn't be just sort of in and perfect. It'd have a curvature to it. So just make sure that you do that, and we're going to start building that up. I don't know if that's coming out on camera, or how well it's coming out on camera. And you may have to do this a couple of times. So we're just curving. We're not going to have a very straight 90-degree shade, because it'll just look unnatural. So we're just going to curve that in. And what I'll do is I'm just going to tuck a little bit under. Again, no perfect angle, so we're going to feather that in on a curve just underneath, like so. Yeah, and I hope that's coming out. Another thing what you can do, you know, you get in real life, you're getting a bit deep, but in real life you'll get underneath your fascias or your barge boards, you'll get dirt build-up, which is what we're trying to emulate, and then weather and things like that, it'll get rained on, or you know, wood will split and water will start dripping down. What you'll then get is things like this. Yeah. And what you want to do, you don't want that blob at the bottom. I'll suck that back up to get rid of any of the wash off your brush. And just try and get a natural fall like that. And you can do that in a few different places. Like so. Don't let any blobs collect, because you just want it to be a faint shadow of where water's dripped down. It's been like stained. Yeah, is that coming out on camera? Can you see that? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to go over again everything exactly how I've just done it, and we're going to get that a little bit more pronounced, so it shows up a little bit better. So we'll come back in a second. Okay guys, so as you can see, I've started put a couple of layers on, so it's showing a bit more pronounced, a bit darker, looks a lot more real. It looks damp and wet and dirty, and you've got the drips coming down. That's as far as I'm going to go. That's basically what I've done on here. There are other ways which I'll show in another video, because I'm going to be doing a few more Bree buildings, and I will show you other ways of weathering and try to get that more realistic look. But for this video and for this tutorial, that is perfect, and if you do that, you're going to get a really good finish. It takes no time at all, it's quite quick. The techniques that I'll show you in the future are kind of you're using wet sea sponges and different shades and different colours and mopping up and dry tissue and things like that, but I'll take you down that route in another video when we do another Bree house, which is a little bit more in depth, and shows you how to build the inside of the house and shows you how to, like I say, get that more realistic rustic look. But for this is as far as we're going to go. These are going to fit purpose, no problem whatsoever. I've also base coated the tile work above the bay window. So what I'm now going to show you, because I need that to get that blended in with the roof and the stonework on the bottom, I'll just get rid of that, I don't need that now for the minute, is again I'm going to show you on this test piece, because it's easier to do than hold the house and do it on the house. This is basically a cast of the exact same stonework that I've used for the bottom of the building, and I've just done half of it so you can see it is, you know, there's no tricks. This is the resin that I use for all the other parts, like the roof tiles, etc. And I've base coated in black down one side, and it is basically going to be washes and dry brushes, gets you to a fairly decent finish like that. Again, in another video I will show you how to take that a little step further, spend a little bit more time on it and get it looking more realistic. But for this, we're just going to dry brush it and wash it. So we'll come back in a moment and I'll get my paints together. Okay guys, so dry brushing the cobblestones at the bottom of these houses is fairly straightforward. We're going to work from a black base coat up to a lighter grey. You don't have to go with grey, I'm just going like with the sort of bog standard grey cobblestones. You know, you could do these in shades of brown, creams, etc., whatever suits your theme. But for Bree, these colours seem to fit quite well. So for this I'm using all Citadel. I'm using Storm Vermin Fur, going up to Dawnstone, and then Administratum Grey. So we're going to start with a heavy dry brush of Storm Vermin Fur, standard dry brush if that's what you want to call it, of Dawnstone, and then a very light dry brush of Administratum Grey. From there we're going to wash it once it's all dry, give it a wash, let that dry, and then we're going to give it another final highlight. So make sure you give your paints a good shake. Just bear with me a second. Don't want you hearing beeps and buzzes from the computer. So dry brushing, very basic technique, but can be easily done in a wrong manner and mess up what it is that you're doing. Models obviously it's a lot easier to mess up. With terrain you get away with murder really. So get some paint on the tips of your brush, some tissue, and then as the name suggests, dry the paint off so there's almost nothing but residue on. What you then want to do is you want to start drawing across in this kind of motion. If you were going for ultra realistic with a dry brush, you tend to go from the top down like that, because you're going to just catch the tops, so it sort of mimics light hitting off the tops of the blocks. But to be honest, at this scale, with things that are going to be 3 or 4 foot away from the eye when you're gaming on the board, we're not that fussed. We just want to get the contrast of the greys and the blacks. So as you can see, I'm just getting it on there, heavy dry brush. I don't want to totally get rid of the black. I want to try and keep the black in the mortar joints between the blocks. Yeah, but we're just taking that sort of black off so it doesn't look black anymore. It is starting to look grey. Now, as I said, we're going to do a heavy dry brush, so I'm going to go back to my pot. I'm going to get a little bit more paint, dry it off on the edge of the pot because we don't want to be wasting paint, and then dry the brush off almost to the point where there's nothing on it, and then we're going to go back in so that we're working off what looks like is almost that Storm Vermin base coat, but with black in the crevices and valleys. There we go. Yeah. So from there, I'm not going to clean my brush. I'm going to go straight to Dawnstone. Give that a shake. I've shut these up prior to filming this, but it's just habit to give them another shake. Make sure your paints are shook up well. A good tip for your paints is to turn them upside down and shake them, because any of the gloopy stuff, the thicker paint at the bottom of the pot, then will drop to the top and mix up with the less gloopy, the more watery stuff. So we're a shade lighter. We're going to go in, not as vigorous. Now we just want to start picking up detail on the blocks. Yeah. Some more of that Dawnstone on. go, that's what we want. So with dry brushing, the temptation sometimes is when it looks like you're not getting the effect that you want is to whack more paint on your brush and go for it. Just persevere with it. A lot of the changes will be happening without your human eye being able to notice because they're so subtle. So there we are. So we're now going to go to the final highlight at this stage, which is Administratum. Like so. So this Administratum Grey is quite light, so we're just going to sort of test the water. We're not going to just go in mad. Yeah. And what I'd do here, so if it was on the one of the corners, if this was, let's say this was the corner, I'd highlight this with the lightest highlight more on the corner than the rest. It just sort of gives the corner of the building a highlight. And that, for the time being, is as far as we're going to go. So clean the brush off. And because the technique you're using a dry brush, the tendency is to think that that is dry and it's not. If you put a wash on that now, the grey paint is going to seep into your wash. So either give it a blast with a hairdryer or give it 10 minutes. So I'm going to give it a blast with a hairdryer and we'll come back in a second. Okay guys, so we've got the dry brushing down. We're going to go straight in with some Null Oil Shade. Make sure you don't use the gloss. Load the brush up, and this, you know, it's not like models where you just sorry, miniature models, your minis where you're trying to keep the shade in certain areas. You just want to get this on. Yeah, I tend to, like you see me do there, I'll do a line across the top and then a thick line and then start dragging that down like so. It's much easier to do it that way because it's a lot easier to, well, let's just say if I don't have enough shade on, it's a lot easier for me to add shade than it is to have too much shade on and try to mop it up. You can mop it up, but it's just easier to do it that way. So as you can see, adding the shade, it's already making a difference, yeah, but we're still a little bit too uniformed on how it looks. So what I'm going to do is we're going to let that dry, and then we're going to come back in with a final couple of highlights. So I'll come back in a second. Okay guys, so the wash is dry. We're going to go back in now with Administratum Grey, and we're just going to do exactly the same as previously with this stage. So get some of the paint off, and we're going to go in very light, yeah, but we're not going to do the whole lot, you see, so I'm just doing smaller areas and try and not be uniformed with it. Yeah, we're going to leave some of the areas darker, sometimes even just concentrating on one of the blocks. Yeah, you see that? These are just like little sort of how can you say, techniques that make it look like you've done more work in there than you actually have. You know, you want to try to get rid of that blanket uniformed look and break up with some little bits of colour. What you can then also do is go in with your, which one is it? Oh, your storm vermin, your darker colour, and you just want, I'm just going to get a little bit on the corner of the brush here. I don't want that wide, so just on the corner. I'm going to brush it off, and what I tend to do there is where I can see that I've highlighted, with that final dry brush I'll blend a darker colour in the bottom. And this is something that if you don't do it, it's not a big deal, it doesn't make a massive difference, really. I just do it because I just think it makes it look more natural, and it sort of breaks up where I can see that I've gone in with a brush, if that makes sense, and looks like it's more sort of a natural occurrence. So I'm not too sure how well that's coming out on camera. I hope it's coming out well. But that's how we dry brush the cobblestones on these in this tutorial. And the tiles are done in exactly the same way. I've just used slightly different shades of grey. So I've got more, how can I say, deeper, darker shades with the Eshin grey and is that Mechanicus, I think it is, and then mixed up some of the Vallejo stuff as well, and that's what I used on the roof. But it's a pretty simple technique. I didn't want the roof to be exactly the same colour as the bottom. Didn't want it to look too uniformed, so I just done different shades. But that's that. So from there we've gone on to the wood, and the wood is basically how you'd paint any other wood. I've gone in with Rhinox hide, I've dry brushed it with dried bark, and then I've dry brushed it with, I think it was Baneblade brown, and just done that on all the wood parts and the windows. Again, with the wood there is a sort of a further technique that we can do that I'm going to do in a separate tutorial for a different build, still on Bree, but a more advanced build. Like I've said before, this is your basic of the basic, and it just shows you what you can end up with even by using the basic techniques. I think that looks pretty cool. You could go further with that now, and you could sort of get some green washes and have green washes sort of coming down the corners on the timbers and on the brick, and it'll look like moss and things like that. You can do it with green paint. You know, you can add all sorts of stuff. I don't know if some of you guys remember when I did the Lake Town houses, the posts on Facebook. I got, I think it was, let's have a look, I've probably got it here. Nurgling green, a white, and I had a blue as well. I can't remember which the blue was. It was a very light blue, a white, an off-white, and Nurgling green. And I used it to sort of simulate bird poo. And what I did, I had 3 small stipple brushes with the 3 colours, dipped my bristles in, and just sort of sprayed them using my finger like that. So I got like very small fine splatters and mixed up, and it looked quite good. It's quite effective. It did actually look like the seagulls that had a field day over the houses of Lake Town. So that's how you get that technique on the stonework. I'm going to finish off these tiles above the window, and then I think we're pretty much, as far as this tutorial goes, going to call that a day. Again, you know, you could go further, but you know, if you wanted it to be a pub type building, put pub signs on and things like that. But that's all that personal preference and fiddling about with the techniques that you've learned already with using the balsa wood or the coffee stirrers and different things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish that painting off, and then we'll come back for a final overview really of the build itself. So I'll see you in a second. Okay guys, so that is pretty much it. That's this Bree house finished, and I, for one, I'm very happy with it. It's very quick and easy way to get a good finish on these type of buildings. So one more thing that I wanted to show you. A lot of people asked when I did the Lake Town house, was it the Lake Town house? Oh no, the Dale house, about basing it afterward. You can base it. What you could do, get yourself some 6mm MDF and just plonk it down, draw around it, leaving yourself like, I don't know, about 2-3 inch perimeter all around. Cut that out, bevel the edges, stick your building on it and base it basically using sand or flock, whatever you're going to do your basing in. For these are going on a board, same as the Dale buildings, and one thing I learned, a lot of the boards that I've built in the past have had fixed terrain on, like fixed ruins and fixed buildings, which is an absolute nightmare for transporting. But I mean, if you're keeping it in your garage or in your home, that's fine, that's perfect. But I use my boards, I mainly build my boards for my events, my tournaments, Scarra and Cheshire. So I need to transport the boards from my home to the venue, etc. and back again. So a way of doing that is to plan your board out, get your buildings where they're